Hey everyone, before we dive into today's journey through Imperial China, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more fascinating stories from history. Now, let's step back in time and discover why surviving even a single day in Imperial China would have been nearly impossible. Imagine waking up in a world completely unlike anything you've ever known. A world where your every move is watched, your every decision could mean life or death, and the very air you breathe seems to hum with rules you don't yet understand. This is Imperial China. It is a place of breathtaking beauty and terrifying discipline, a land of immense inventions and staggering wealth, but also a world where survival is a daily challenge and mistakes are rarely forgiven. To truly grasp what life would have been like here, you have to step into the shoes of an ordinary person born into this extraordinary civilization, a world ruled by emperors, structured by Confucian ideals, and sustained by a culture that demands perfection at every level. From the moment you are born in Imperial China, your life is already partly written. Your family, your gender, and your social status set the path you will walk, and the expectations placed upon you are as rigid as the walls of the palaces that tower over the cities. If you are born into a noble family, life may appear gilded, but even then, it comes with pressures and responsibilities that modern life can scarcely imagine. Education is strict, behavior is scrutinized, and the failure to meet expectations can bring shame not just upon yourself, but upon your entire family. For those born into lower classes, the world is even harsher. Opportunities are limited, and survival is often a matter of skill, cunning, and endurance rather than luck alone. Children, from the earliest days, are not free to wander or play as we might imagine. Boys are trained to contribute to the family's wealth or sustain their livelihood through trade, agriculture, or craftwork. Girls are educated in household management, the care of family, and often obedience to the men in their lives. Childhood in Imperial China is not a carefree time. It is the beginning of a rigorous apprenticeship to society itself. Every lesson learned, every rule followed, is a survival skill. Mistakes are punished, sometimes severely, with the understanding that failure to conform can lead to consequences far beyond a simple scolding. In many communities, public shaming is not merely a deterrent. It is a form of social control that reinforces the strict order of the world. But life in Imperial China is not just a matter of obeying family and community. The state itself exerts a formidable influence. The emperor is not merely a ruler. He is a divine figure, the Son of Heaven, whose word is law. To defy him, or even to appear disrespectful, is a risk that could end in exile, imprisonment, or death. Officials and bureaucrats operate with absolute authority, and corruption, favoritism, and intrigue mean that even the most careful citizen must constantly navigate a treacherous landscape of power. One misstep, a word spoken at the wrong time, a gesture misread could lead to disaster. The constant presence of authority, the invisible weight of expectation, makes life in Imperial China a high-stakes game from the very start. The environment itself adds to the challenge. Cities are bustling centers of trade, culture, and innovation, but they are also crowded, noisy, and often unsanitary. Villages are closer to nature, but they are vulnerable to famine, floods, and other disasters that can wipe out entire communities. In both settings, the struggle for survival is real and persistent. Food is never guaranteed, and meals that we take for granted today were a hard-earned luxury. A poor harvest could mean starvation, and the blame for misfortune often falls upon those who have the least power to change it. Survival requires not just strength and intelligence, but vigilance and adaptability, qualities that must be cultivated from the earliest days of life. Imperial China is also a world of ritual and ceremony. Every action, no matter how small, is embedded in cultural meaning. The way you greet elders, the manner in which you dress, the way you conduct yourself in public, all of these are bound by social and religious expectations. Failure to follow these norms brings shame, a powerful force in a society where honor and reputation often determine one's fate as much as wealth or rank. The Confucian ideals that structure life emphasize hierarchy, obedience, and duty, and they shape not only families and schools, but the very fabric of society itself. To live without respect for these principles is to court disaster. Even the natural world plays a role in determining your fate. Imperial China's people were acutely aware of the forces of nature, interpreting floods, droughts, earthquakes, and celestial events as messages from heaven. To survive, one had to understand these signs and act accordingly, whether by performing specific rituals, adjusting agricultural practices, or appeasing local spirits. Ignorance or inaction could be fatal. Life in Imperial China is a delicate balance between human effort and the whims of nature, and the consequences of failure are immediate and often severe. Education, when available, is rigorous and unrelenting. Children fortunate enough to attend school are taught not only literacy and mathematics, but also philosophy, ethics, and history. Success in the imperial examinations, the path to government service, requires memorizing vast amounts of classical texts and demonstrating the ability to apply moral reasoning to complex situations. The examinations are grueling, competitive, and merciless. Passing them can elevate a person's social status, while failure condemns them to obscurity. In this way, the intellectual life of Imperial China is both a ladder to opportunity and a source of immense pressure, demanding discipline and dedication from the earliest possible age. The moral code of the society is not merely abstract, it has real consequences for daily life. Virtue, obedience, and loyalty are rewarded, while disrespect, laziness, or failure to fulfill duties is punished. Families monitor their children closely, communities enforce social norms, and the state ensures that everyone knows the rules. The social order is not a suggestion, it is a structure as rigid as stone. To deviate from it is to invite misfortune, and the constant awareness of these stakes shapes every action, every thought, every moment of existence. Even play and leisure are structured by social expectation. Festivals, holidays, and rituals are not merely for enjoyment. They are occasions for reinforcing hierarchy, demonstrating loyalty, and observing the moral and spiritual codes that govern society. Participation is not optional, and failure to observe properly can bring shame, marking an individual or family as unworthy. In this way, even moments of joy carry weight, and the demands of culture infiltrate every aspect of life. Travel and movement are also fraught with danger. Roads are long and often unsafe, and travelers risk bandits, harsh weather, and illness. Permissions may be required to cross certain areas, and the consequences of traveling without proper authorization can be severe. The modern sense of freedom, of wandering without concern, simply does not exist. Life is structured, constrained, and carefully monitored at every turn. Survival in Imperial China also depends on alliances and relationships. Family ties, friendships, and local connections can make the difference between security and vulnerability. Favor with officials or elders can provide protection, while enmity or disrespect can be deadly. Negotiating social relationships is an essential skill, and the consequences of failure are immediate and tangible. Imperial China is also a land of innovation and incredible achievement. Inventions like paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass transformed society and the world. Architecture, art, and literature flourished under dynastic rule. Yet, even amidst these wonders, ordinary life is demanding, harsh, and often precarious. The achievements of civilization do not eliminate the daily struggle for survival. They exist alongside it, shaping the context but not softening the challenges faced by the common person. Religion and philosophy are central to understanding the world. Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism guide moral behavior, explain natural events, and provide frameworks for understanding life's challenges. Rituals, meditation, and ethical practices are more than spiritual exercises. They are practical tools for navigating a society that demands obedience, respect, and careful attention to every detail. Disregard these teachings at your peril, for the social, spiritual, and legal consequences are intertwined in ways that affect every facet of life. In this world, every day is a test. Every choice, no matter how small, has consequences. Survival requires not just strength or intelligence, but constant awareness, adaptability, and humility. A slip in judgment, a moment of carelessness, can have repercussions that echo through the family, the community, and even the state. The pressure is relentless, the expectations unyielding, and the stakes are nothing less than life itself. To imagine living in Imperial China is to understand a civilization that is at once magnificent and unforgiving. It is a world of beauty and terror, innovation and discipline, opportunity and danger. You would need courage to face it, wisdom to navigate it, and luck to survive it. And yet, this world produced some of the greatest inventions, philosophies, and works of art in human history, showing that even under immense pressure, human creativity and resilience can flourish. So, would you survive a single day in Imperial China? Only if you understood the rules, respected the hierarchy, worked tirelessly, and stayed ever vigilant. Every morning you wake up, every task you undertake, every word you speak, all of it matters. This is a civilization that demands everything, and in return, offers both greatness and peril. To walk through its streets, to breathe its air, to witness its splendor and fear, is to understand a world where survival is an art, a science, and a constant challenge. A world where you truly would not last a day unless you were prepared in mind, body, and spirit. Life in Imperial China was not gentle, not forgiving, and certainly not equal. From the moment a child was born, their entire world was defined by the circumstances of their birth, a reality that dictated opportunities, social status, and even the likelihood of survival. It was a world in which social hierarchy was paramount, where the gap between privilege and hardship could be vast, and where the expectations of family, community, and the state shaped every aspect of life. To truly understand how unforgiving this civilization could be, imagine being an ordinary child, born into a family with little wealth, in a village far from the grandeur of the imperial capital. Your very existence is immediately subject to the scrutiny of those around you, and the pressures to conform, work, and obey begin almost before you can even walk. The first lesson comes with birth itself. In many communities, a child's gender determined their path before they even opened their eyes. Boys were celebrated because they could carry on the family name, inherit land, and serve in the military or bureaucracy. Girls, though cherished, were often seen primarily in terms of their future roles as wives and mothers. Their education was focused on domestic skills, obedience, and moral conduct. From the very beginning, life was unequal, and survival required understanding and accepting this hierarchy. Families invested in sons with the hope of prosperity and legacy, while daughters were trained to serve, to be careful, and to avoid mistakes that could bring shame to the household. Even before the child could walk or talk, the family's influence shaped their early life. Newborns were subject to rituals and customs, designed to ensure survival and protect against evil spirits, diseases, and misfortune. These rituals were not mere tradition, they reflected a practical understanding of danger in a world where infant mortality was high and medical knowledge was limited. Families followed these practices meticulously, knowing that a misstep could mean illness or death. To survive in Imperial China, even the youngest members of society had to be born into a world of rules, expectations, and constant vigilance. As children grew, their daily existence was anything but carefree. Boys were expected to learn trades, farm work, or other skills that would allow them to contribute to the family's survival. Labor was not optional, it was a duty. From sunrise to sunset, young boys worked in the fields, tended to livestock, repaired tools, or assisted in their father's trade. Physical endurance and obedience were as necessary as intelligence. For failure to perform one's duties could result in punishment. Corporal discipline was common, and children learned quickly that disobedience could be met with beatings or public humiliation. Lessons were learned not only through guidance but through fear, and children who did not adapt were at a severe disadvantage. Girls, on the other hand, faced a different set of expectations. Their education was primarily domestic, focusing on managing a household, cooking, weaving, and caring for younger siblings. Obedience, humility, and moral conduct were emphasized above all else. Girls were taught to respect elders, follow strict social etiquette, and prepare for the responsibilities of marriage. Mistakes were not always punished physically, but they could bring lasting shame, affecting not just the girl, but her entire family. Social perception mattered immensely, and girls had to navigate a world where every action was scrutinized, and reputation was often as valuable as survival itself. The family itself was a strict institution. Parents were not merely caregivers, they were enforcers of societal norms and guardians of the household's honor. Children were expected to follow instructions without question, and filial piety, respect for parents and elders, was a central virtue. Disobedience or disrespect could result in punishments that ranged from verbal reprimands to physical discipline. Families were deeply involved in the moral and practical education of children, teaching lessons in obedience, labor, and the subtle skills needed to navigate a complex social hierarchy. Life was not about personal choice. It was about fulfilling duties, respecting authority, and ensuring that the family's name remained untarnished. Education, when available, added another layer of pressure. Even for children born into modest circumstances, schooling was an essential tool for social mobility. Learning to read, write, and recite classical texts was not merely academic. It was a way to secure a future, perhaps even a place in the bureaucracy. Success in examinations could elevate a person far above their humble beginnings, but failure could condemn them to a lifetime of labor and obscurity. The educational system was rigorous, often overwhelming, and demanded discipline, memorization, and mental fortitude. A child who struggled academically risked being labeled as lazy or incapable, a stigma that could have lifelong consequences. Beyond the family and education, children had to contend with the physical realities of Imperial China. Illness was common and medical knowledge was limited. Herbs, acupuncture, and other traditional remedies were used, but they were not always effective. A simple fever or infection could become fatal. Nutrition was inconsistent, particularly for those in poorer families, making children vulnerable to malnutrition and disease. Physical strength, endurance, and a careful approach to daily life were essential to survive in an environment where the smallest misfortune could have severe consequences. Social interaction was also governed by strict rules. Children learned from an early age to respect hierarchy, not only within their families but in the broader community. They were expected to show deference to elders, to behave properly in public, and to avoid conflicts that could bring shame or danger. Misbehavior was not only a personal failure, it reflected poorly on the family and could lead to isolation, ridicule, or punishment. Learning these social codes was as important as any academic lesson because navigating human relationships safely could mean the difference between survival and misfortune. The village or city in which one was born also shaped daily life. Rural communities were labor-intensive, reliant on agriculture, and vulnerable to natural disasters. Children were expected to contribute from a young age, whether planting crops, tending animals, or assisting with household chores. City life offered more opportunities but came with new dangers, crowded conditions, disease, crime, and the constant scrutiny of neighbors and officials. Both environments demanded awareness, diligence, and adaptability, and children had to learn these skills quickly. Even leisure and play were constrained by expectations. Festivals, rituals, and communal gatherings were opportunities to reinforce social norms, teach children proper conduct, and instill a sense of duty and morality. Children were not merely allowed to enjoy these occasions, they were expected to participate correctly. Improper behavior, whether in gesture, speech, or action, could bring shame or subtle punishment. Life, even in moments of apparent joy, was a constant education in survival, hierarchy, and obedience. Gender roles, deeply ingrained from birth, dictated nearly every aspect of a child's experience. Boys trained for labor, leadership, and service to the family or state. Girls trained for domestic life, marriage, and moral virtue. The consequences of failing to adhere to these roles could be severe, ranging from social ridicule to limits on personal opportunity. These gender expectations were enforced not only by families but by the entire social structure, creating a world where deviation was rarely tolerated. The very environment, both natural and social, was a teacher. Children learned early that survival depended on understanding cycles of planting and harvest, the behavior of rivers and weather, and the risks posed by animals, disease, and human threats. Observation, caution, and skill were necessary to navigate daily life. Mistakes could be fatal, and the lessons learned in childhood were not theoretical, they were matters of practical survival. Imperial China was also a society deeply conscious of morality, ethics, and spiritual forces. Children were taught to understand their place in a moral universe where virtue, obedience, and loyalty determined not only social standing but also divine favor. Religious rituals, Confucian teachings, and local customs reinforced this understanding. To ignore these lessons was not merely ignorant, it was dangerous. Social ostracism, misfortune, and even legal consequences could follow from failing to respect the moral codes that governed life. Punishments for mistakes in childhood were varied and omnipresent. Corporal punishment was common in both homes and schools, meant to correct behavior and instill discipline. Public humiliation reinforced conformity, teaching children that their actions were constantly observed and judged. Even minor infractions could carry weight, as society operated on the principle that personal failings could reflect upon the family and community as a whole. Learning to navigate these rules was essential for survival. The demands on children extended beyond labor and education to their moral and social development. Obedience, humility, diligence, and respect were not abstract ideals. They were practical requirements for safety, social acceptance, and future opportunity. A child who failed to internalize these principles risked punishment, exclusion, and a diminished chance to thrive as an adult. In this way, childhood in Imperial China was a period of intense preparation for the harsh realities of adult life. Even friendships and peer interactions were structured by societal rules. Children learned early to navigate relationships carefully, balancing loyalty, respect, and self-preservation. Jealousies, rivalries, and misunderstandings could escalate, and the social consequences could extend beyond the playground or neighborhood. Survival in Imperial China required not only physical skill and obedience, but also emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and careful attention to social nuance. The stakes of childhood in Imperial China were never abstract. They were immediate and tangible. Health, education, reputation, and labor all affected survival. A misstep could bring illness, punishment, or social ostracism. Success in learning and behavior could improve one's circumstances, but failure could cement a life of hardship. The pressure to conform, work, and excel was relentless, shaping the minds and bodies of children in ways that left no room for laziness or carelessness. As children grew into teenagers, the intensity only increased. Boys prepared for manhood through apprenticeship, military training, or study, while girls prepared for marriage and household management. Social expectations, labor, and education converged to form a rigid framework, leaving little freedom for personal desire or experimentation. Every choice carried weight, every action had consequence, and every day was a lesson in survival, obedience, and strategy. Even minor events could carry enormous significance. A missed harvest, a poorly executed household task, or a minor breach of etiquette could affect the family's status or security. Children learned quickly that the consequences of failure were not theoretical. They were immediate, real, and often severe. Life was a constant balancing act, and those who adapted, learned, and obeyed thrived, while those who faltered struggled to survive. This relentless focus on duty, obedience, and survival forged individuals who were disciplined, resilient, and aware of the consequences of every action. Yet it also created a society where fear, shame, and social pressure were omnipresent. Childhood was not a carefree time. It was a preparation for the unyielding demands of adulthood, a training ground for navigating a world where life was precarious and survival was never guaranteed. The justice system in Imperial China was unlike anything most of us have ever known. It was a world where laws were absolute, punishments were severe, and the slightest misstep could have consequences far beyond what a modern mind might imagine. To live in Imperial China was to exist under a constant shadow of authority, a shadow that stretched from the emperor himself down to the local magistrates, village elders, and enforcers who ensured that every law was obeyed. Understanding this system is essential to grasp why surviving a day in Imperial China was no small feat. It was a continuous balancing act between obedience, caution, and survival instinct. Imagine a small village in Imperial China. The streets are dusty, lined with wooden houses, and alive with the sounds of people working, trading, and going about their daily lives. The magistrate, a local official appointed by the emperor, holds authority over the area. His word is law, and his presence is both feared and respected. A villager accused of a crime does not face a system of fair trials as we know them today. Instead, they face an intricate web of investigation, interrogation, and judgment where appearances, reputation, and social standing often matter more than facts. The magistrate relies on a combination of personal observation, witness testimony, and confessions sometimes obtained under pressure to determine guilt. In this world, the truth is important, but compliance and public example are paramount. The law is not just about justice. It is about maintaining social order. Even minor offenses could be treated harshly. Theft, for example, was not seen as a trivial crime, but as a threat to the stability of the community. A person caught stealing a loaf of bread or a bundle of firewood could face public beatings, fines, or even exile. The punishment was intended to deter not only the offender, but also anyone else who might consider similar behavior. The principle was simple: fear ensures obedience. Public shaming was a common tactic. Offenders might be paraded through the village, branded with marks, or subjected to forms of humiliation that left lasting scars on both the body and the mind. In Imperial China, justice was designed to be a spectacle as much as a consequence. Offending the emperor or imperial officials was an entirely different matter. The emperor was considered the son of heaven, the ultimate authority in the land, and disrespect or disobedience could have fatal consequences. A simple misstep, a poorly chosen word, or even a gesture perceived as insulting could result in execution. Punishments were public and dramatic, intended to reinforce the hierarchy and remind everyone of the consequences of defiance. Imperial decrees could be swift and merciless. Even rumors of disloyalty could lead to investigation, imprisonment, or exile. In this system, the stakes were incredibly high, and no citizen was truly free from scrutiny. The investigation process itself was intense. Accusations were taken seriously, and magistrates often relied on extensive questioning to determine guilt. Confessions were highly valued, sometimes more than evidence, and were frequently obtained through persuasion, intimidation, or even torture. Torture, though horrifying by modern standards, was considered a legitimate tool for uncovering the truth. The underlying assumption was that individuals might lie to protect themselves, and only extreme measures could reveal the reality. In this environment, being accused of a crime could be as dangerous as committing one. A person could be punished simply for being suspected or for failing to convincingly defend themselves. Punishments were diverse, often brutal, and designed to instill fear. Beatings were common for minor offenses, using sticks, rods, or other implements. Public shaming involved placing offenders in stocks or on display, sometimes for hours or days, as a warning to the community. Exile, forced labor, and confiscation of property were also employed. Capital punishment, the death penalty, was used for serious crimes such as murder, treason, or theft of imperial property. Methods were harsh and sometimes ceremonial, reinforcing the authority of the state while sending a clear message to the population. Justice was both a practical tool and a performance, a way to enforce compliance and maintain order. The social consequences of legal transgressions were often as significant as the formal punishments. Families of offenders could face fines, labor obligations, or social ostracism. Reputation in Imperial China was a matter of survival. A tarnished family name could limit marriage prospects, educational opportunities, and social mobility. Children and relatives of offenders were often compelled to live with the consequences of someone else's actions, illustrating how tightly interwoven personal behavior and community perception were in this society. In this sense, the justice system extended beyond the individual, influencing the lives of entire families and communities. The fear of punishment permeated daily life. Citizens learned to navigate rules carefully, understanding that minor infractions could escalate into serious consequences. Obedience, humility, and caution became survival skills. A villager might follow regulations meticulously, not out of loyalty to the state, but out of a practical understanding of risk. Even actions that seem trivial today, entering a restricted area, failing to greet a superior properly, speaking out of turn, could be perceived as disrespectful or subversive. with severe repercussions. Life was a continuous negotiation with authority, where awareness and prudence were essential. The law also served as a tool for political control. Officials used accusations and punishments to maintain power, silence dissent, and reinforce social hierarchies. Corruption was widespread, bribes could influence outcomes, and favoritism often determined who faced consequences. Yet, despite these flaws, the system maintained a rigid structure that the population had to respect. The unpredictability of justice added to the challenge of survival, creating a society where vigilance, careful behavior, and strategic thinking were necessary for every individual. Local disputes were often settled within this framework, and even ordinary disagreements could escalate into legal matters. Property disputes, quarrels over land, and personal conflicts were handled through the magistrate's court, where impartiality was not guaranteed, and the influence of wealth, status, or connections could tip the balance. Ordinary citizens had to be constantly aware of social norms, legal codes, and local power dynamics to avoid entanglement in these disputes. Survival required knowledge, tact, and a keen sense of self-preservation. Beyond the local level, imperial decrees could transform everyday life. Laws issued by the emperor or high-ranking officials could impose strict regulations on commerce, agriculture, travel, and personal behavior. Compliance was mandatory, and ignorance of the law was not accepted as an excuse. Citizens learned quickly that staying informed and attentive to authority was not merely prudent, it was essential. Violations of these decrees could result in fines, forced labor, or corporal punishment. The law was pervasive, shaping both large-scale society and the minutiae of daily existence. Religious and moral codes were intertwined with the legal system. Confucian ideals emphasized hierarchy, loyalty, and obedience, and these principles influenced judgments and punishments. Crimes were often considered not only legal violations but moral failings. Offenders were seen as disrupting harmony, dishonoring their family, or violating the social and cosmic order. The overlap of law, ethics, and morality created a world where personal behavior was constantly scrutinized, and deviation could lead to social and legal consequences alike. Even trade and commerce were heavily regulated, with strict rules enforced by officials. Merchants were expected to adhere to pricing regulations, trade practices, and tax obligations. Failure to comply could result in confiscation of goods, fines, or imprisonment. Markets and trade hubs were often patrolled, and disputes were swiftly adjudicated to maintain order. In this way, the justice system permeated economic life, ensuring that even daily transactions were subject to scrutiny and control. The fear of legal repercussions influenced personal behavior in profound ways. People learned to think before acting, to anticipate the reactions of authority, and to maintain appearances at all times. Lies, deceit, or casual disregard for rules could be disastrous. Survival required constant awareness, mental agility, and careful observation of social cues. The justice system created an environment where vigilance was essential, shaping the behaviors, thoughts, and even relationships of individuals. Imprisonment, when used, was often harsh and unforgiving. Jails were overcrowded, unsanitary, and dangerous. Prisoners were subjected to harsh conditions, minimal food, and disease. Extended confinement could be a sentence in itself, even before judgment was passed. Torture was sometimes employed to extract confessions or punish offenders, reflecting a system that valued compliance and deterrence over leniency. The threat of incarceration was ever present, a reminder that law enforcement extended into the physical and psychological spheres of life. The complexity of the system meant that knowledge was power. Those who understood the laws, the customs, and the workings of local authorities could navigate society more safely. Ignorance, however, was perilous. Citizens had to learn not only what was legal, but also what was socially acceptable, what would provoke punishment, and what could be overlooked. Survival depended on this nuanced understanding, a skill cultivated from childhood and reinforced throughout life. The justice system also shaped relationships and social interactions. Neighbors monitored each other, and accusations could be motivated by jealousy, greed, or personal vendettas. Trust had to be measured carefully, and alliances were strategic. Even casual remarks or perceived slights could have serious consequences if they reached the wrong ears. Life under this system demanded constant vigilance, awareness of social dynamics, and a careful balancing of honesty, tact, and self-preservation. Punishments served as powerful warnings to the broader population. Public executions, floggings, and displays of humiliation were not only about penalizing offenders, but about sending a clear message to society. The laws were enforced in a way that created visible consequences, reminding everyone that the authority of the state was absolute. People learned to internalize fear as a tool of compliance, understanding that even minor infractions could escalate dramatically. In addition to criminal justice, civil disputes were tightly controlled. Land ownership, inheritance, family disputes, and business disagreements were adjudicated with formal procedures. The magistrate acted as both judge and enforcer, and decisions were influenced by social status, connections, and local customs. While the law provided structure, it also demanded careful navigation, strategic thinking, and deference to authority to avoid disastrous outcomes. Ultimately, the justice system in Imperial China created a society where survival depended on awareness, obedience, and caution. Life was a continuous negotiation with authority, and individuals had to develop skills in observation, discretion, and strategic behavior. The law was pervasive, the punishments harsh, and the stakes incredibly high. In this world, even a moment of carelessness could have devastating consequences, and the margin for error was small. To live in Imperial China was to live in a society where justice was swift, fear was constant, and survival required more than luck. It demanded intelligence, social awareness, and the ability to anticipate the consequences of every action. The harsh legal system was not merely a framework for punishing crime, it was a pervasive force that shaped thought, behavior, and society itself. Understanding it is essential to appreciating why life in Imperial China was as precarious as it was fascinating, and why surviving even a single day required skill, vigilance, and careful navigation of a complex and unforgiving system. Life in Imperial China was not just about obeying authority or avoiding punishment. Survival itself was a daily struggle, a relentless battle against nature, society, and circumstance. From the moment people woke each morning to the moment they rested at night, every action, every decision, and every movement carried weight. For the common person, survival was never guaranteed. Food, water, shelter, and safety were not assured, and even the smallest misfortune could turn life into a fight for existence. To truly understand what it meant to live in this world, one must look closely at the daily realities, the routines, and the constant challenges that defined ordinary life. Imagine waking up before sunrise in a small village surrounded by rice paddies, rivers, and mountains. The day begins with labor, not leisure. Fields must be tended, crops watered, livestock fed. The success of these tasks determines whether the family will eat, survive, and withstand the coming months. A poor harvest could spell famine, and the consequences of failure could be immediate and severe. Labor is physically demanding, mentally exhausting, and unrelenting. Children, adults, and the elderly all contribute, understanding that every hour spent idle could mean hunger tomorrow. Famine was a constant threat. Crop failures due to droughts, floods, pests, or disease could devastate a community. A single season of poor yields could leave families scrambling to find enough food to survive. Grain stores were limited, and food prices could skyrocket during shortages, making it impossible for the poor to purchase essentials. Villagers often had to rely on wild plants, foraging, and ingenuity to fill empty stomachs. Starvation was not uncommon, and families lived with the constant knowledge that disaster could strike at any moment. Water, too, was both a necessity and a challenge. Rivers and wells were sources of life, but also sources of danger. Contaminated water could spread disease, while seasonal floods could destroy homes, fields, and entire communities. Villagers had to carefully manage their access to water, storing it for dry seasons, purifying it as best they could, and defending it against theft or conflict with neighbors. The natural environment was not passive, it was an active force in daily life, shaping behavior, routines, and even social interactions. Disease was another omnipresent threat. Imperial China did not have modern medicine or antibiotics, and even minor illnesses could become life-threatening. Smallpox, dysentery, and cholera were feared, and outbreaks could sweep through entire villages, leaving death and despair in their wake. Medical knowledge relied heavily on herbal remedies, acupuncture, and superstition. While some treatments were effective, many were experimental, inconsistent, or simply ineffective. People had to rely on intuition, observation, and the wisdom passed down through generations to protect themselves and their families. Illness could strike anyone, at any time, and its consequences were immediate and potentially fatal. The struggle for food extended beyond the fields. Hunting and fishing supplemented diets, but these activities required skill, strength, and patience. Villagers had to navigate dangerous terrain, confront wild animals, and contend with seasonal scarcity. Failure in these endeavors could mean going hungry for days. Even daily meals required planning, preparation, and vigilance. Rice, the staple food for much of China, demanded careful cultivation, proper storage, and protection from pests. Any lapse could result in waste, loss, and hunger. The physical environment itself was full of hazards. Mountains, rivers, forests, and plains offered resources but also posed dangers. Flooding rivers could sweep away homes and crops. Unstable terrain could cause injury during routine travel. Wild animals threatened livestock and, occasionally, humans. Typhoons, droughts, and other natural disasters tested resilience daily. The environment demanded respect, attentiveness, and careful planning, and the consequences of neglect were often deadly. Housing was another reflection of struggle. Many villagers lived in simple wooden or earthen homes with thatched roofs. These structures provided basic shelter but offered little protection from extreme weather. During winter, families faced freezing temperatures with minimal heating. Summer brought heat, humidity, and insects. Natural disasters could destroy homes entirely, forcing families to rebuild from scratch, often with little assistance. The effort required to maintain even the most basic shelter was immense and constant. Economic survival was equally challenging. Farmers and artisans had to work tirelessly not only to sustain their families, but also to meet the demands of taxes and obligations to local authorities. Taxes were often heavy, collected in the form of grain, labor, or other goods. Failure to meet these obligations could result in punishment, confiscation, or further hardship. Even those who worked diligently found themselves vulnerable to bureaucratic demands, corruption, and unpredictable rulings. The struggle for financial stability was relentless. and every day required careful labor, negotiation, and foresight. Family responsibilities compounded daily pressures. Children were expected to contribute to household work, tending fields, preparing meals, fetching water, or caring for younger siblings. Adults balanced labor, social obligations, and care for elders. Every member of the household was integral to survival. Neglecting duties could endanger the entire family, creating a system in which cooperation, discipline, and endurance were not merely virtues, but essential tools for life. The social environment added another layer of complexity. Villagers and townspeople were constantly aware of each other's actions. Social reputation was tied to survival. Individuals who failed to contribute, behaved disrespectfully, or broke communal norms risked ostracism or punishment. Community oversight was pervasive. Public opinion, combined with the legal system, reinforced order and compliance. To live successfully, people had to balance personal needs with the expectations of family, neighbors, and authority figures. The cycle of labor, obligation, and vigilance left little time for rest. Sleep was precious, often cut short by early rising to work the fields or perform essential household tasks. Meals were functional rather than leisurely, and leisure activities were rare, often tied to festivals or rituals. Even these moments required careful adherence to cultural norms and expectations, reinforcing hierarchy, duty, and social cohesion. Survival dominated life, leaving little room for personal indulgence or freedom. Travel and mobility presented additional challenges. Roads were primitive, and journeys could be dangerous. Bandits, wild animals, and harsh terrain threatened travelers. Permissions were often required to move between regions, and unauthorized travel could result in punishment. Merchants, officials, and commoners alike had to navigate this environment carefully. Safety depended on awareness, planning, and sometimes luck. Even a simple trip to a neighboring village required strategy and caution, reflecting the broader dangers of daily life. Weather was another constant factor in survival. Seasonal variations could bring both bounty and disaster. Monsoon rains could flood fields, while droughts could ruin harvests. Snow and frost could threaten crops, livestock, and human health. People had to understand the rhythms of the natural world, adapt their labor and routines, and prepare for unforeseen challenges. Awareness of weather patterns, environmental signs, and seasonal cycles was not merely practical, it was a form of survival knowledge passed through generations. Illness and injury were further complications. With limited medical knowledge, even minor wounds could become infected, and common illnesses could escalate to life-threatening conditions. Families relied on herbal remedies, acupuncture, and traditional healing practices, but success was uncertain. Community healers and traveling doctors provided assistance, but access was inconsistent and often costly. Daily vigilance in avoiding injury, maintaining hygiene, and observing health rituals was essential. Life was fragile, and the margin for error was narrow. Children's education and labor also intersected with survival. Boys learned trades, agricultural skills, or literacy if opportunities allowed, while girls were trained in household management and moral behavior. These skills were not theoretical, they were practical tools for sustaining life. Education, both formal and informal, focused on practical knowledge, ethical behavior, and social norms. Skills in farming, cooking, and managing resources could mean the difference between hunger and sustenance. Knowledge was survival. The intersection of labor, environment, and social expectation created a world of continuous pressure. People had to work long hours, maintain social order, avoid punishment, and navigate natural hazards simultaneously. Mistakes were costly. A mismanaged crop, a misjudged interaction, or a minor illness could cascade into serious consequences. Every decision carried weight, and survival required constant attention, effort, and foresight. Food scarcity reinforced social and economic hierarchies. Wealthier families could stockpile, store grain, and hire labor, while poorer families relied on subsistence farming and foraging. Hunger was a daily reality for many, shaping behavior, social interaction, and even moral decisions. Theft, barter, and risk-taking became strategies for survival. Desperation could push individuals to dangerous or morally complex choices, illustrating the precariousness of life. Community support was essential, but limited. Villagers often relied on each other for labor, protection, and knowledge, but resources were scarce and competition was constant. Social cohesion could provide safety, but it also created obligations and risks. Failing to contribute or violating norms could jeopardize one's standing and access to communal resources. Survival was a collective effort as much as an individual struggle. Even simple daily tasks required skill and vigilance. Preparing food, maintaining shelter, collecting water, and managing livestock all demanded knowledge, coordination, and attention to detail. Mistakes were not easily forgiven. Life in Imperial China was a series of interconnected challenges where the failure to master one aspect could compromise the entire household. Each day required planning, labor, observation, and adaptation, reinforcing the relentless nature of survival. In this world, luck played a role alongside skill. Natural disasters, sudden illness, or political interference could disrupt even the most carefully managed lives. People learned to mitigate risk through preparation, knowledge, and strategic alliances. Yet, despite careful planning, unpredictability remained a constant. Survival required resilience, adaptability, and an understanding that control was always limited. The combination of environmental, social, and political pressures meant that even the smallest decisions were weighted with consequence. Choosing where to work, how to interact with neighbors, or how to allocate limited resources could have immediate and long-term effects. Life in Imperial China demanded strategic thinking, foresight, and mental resilience. Every action was a test of judgment, patience, and endurance. This daily struggle shaped culture, behavior, and values. Hard work, discipline, and obedience were rewarded. Negligence, laziness, or carelessness were punished. Communities reinforced these values through social pressure, ritual, and law. Children absorbed these lessons from birth, learning that life was a constant negotiation with environment, authority, and circumstance. Survival was not just a matter of physical strength, but of intellect, social awareness, and moral vigilance. Even spiritual practices intersected with daily survival. Rituals, offerings, and adherence to religious principles were not just acts of faith. They were ways to seek protection from misfortune, gain favor with deities, and ensure communal harmony. Observing these practices could provide psychological comfort, social approval, and practical guidance for managing risks. Spiritual life and survival were intertwined, reflecting the holistic challenges of existence. In short, life in Imperial China was an endless cycle of labor, vigilance, and adaptation. The struggle for food, safety, and stability defined every day. Individuals had to navigate a complex web of environmental hazards, social expectations, legal obligations, and economic pressures. Mistakes were costly and opportunities were limited. To survive, one needed skill, knowledge, endurance, and resilience. Life was precarious, demanding, and relentless, yet within this struggle, people cultivated ingenuity, community, and cultural richness. Every sunrise marked another day of challenge. Every sunset offered a momentary reprieve, but also the reminder that survival was not guaranteed. Imperial China was a land of beauty, innovation, and grandeur, but for its ordinary inhabitants, it was a world of hardship, danger, and daily struggle. To live here was to engage in a continuous battle for existence, a life where every action mattered, every choice carried weight, and survival was never certain. Only the vigilant, resourceful, and resilient could endure. Imperial China was not only a land of harsh laws and relentless labor. It was also a land of immense power, intricate politics, and a society in which the slightest misstep could lead to ruin. To understand why life was so dangerous, one must look at the complex web of authority, influence, and intrigue that defined the empire from the emperor's court to the villages in the countryside. Power was absolute at the top, but it rippled downward, creating a society where every interaction, every word, and every decision carried hidden consequences. At the heart of this system was the emperor, the ultimate authority. Viewed as the son of heaven, the emperor was considered semi-divine, a figure whose word could not be challenged. One misinterpreted gesture, one poorly timed word, could mean execution or exile. Imperial decrees shaped the lives of millions, and obedience was not merely expected, it was enforced with both fear and ceremony. Yet, even within this central figure, the emperor relied heavily on officials, advisors, and eunuchs, creating layers of influence that could determine the fate of those beneath him. The court was a maze of relationships, alliances, rivalries, and rival ambitions, where knowledge of protocol and timing could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Officials, magistrates, and bureaucrats wielded significant power in their localities. They could enforce laws, collect taxes, resolve disputes, and impose punishments. But this power came with a dual edge. Officials were accountable to superiors, but they also had incentives to demonstrate loyalty, skill, and cunning. Corruption was widespread, and bribes, favoritism, or influence could determine outcomes. An ordinary person navigating this system needed caution, strategy, and the ability to anticipate human behavior. A seemingly minor interaction, a conversation, a misdirected bow, a poorly worded request could escalate into a significant danger. Survival was not merely about obeying laws. It was about understanding the complex hierarchy of authority and influence. The palace itself was a hotbed of intrigue and danger. Eunuchs, concubines, generals, and ministers all sought favor and influence, often resorting to manipulation, deception, or even murder. Rumors, secrets, and alliances were currency, and power was both coveted and deadly. Court politics could affect the entire empire, as the fall of a favored official could lead to purges, confiscations, or mass executions. Even the most careful officials and courtiers had to constantly monitor their position, navigate rivalries, and anticipate threats. For ordinary citizens, awareness of palace politics was often limited, but the effects could be catastrophic, as edicts, taxation, and judicial decisions could suddenly shift due to intrigue at the highest levels. Local leaders and magistrates mirrored this dynamic on a smaller scale. Village elders, community heads, and regional governors held the power to enforce law, distribute resources, and arbitrate disputes. Their decisions could mean comfort, security, or suffering. Bribery, favoritism, and manipulation were common. Ordinary people had to negotiate carefully, offering respect, gifts, or allegiance when necessary, while avoiding offense that could provoke retaliation. The balance was delicate. Even an innocent remark, a misunderstood gesture, or a minor dispute could escalate into punishment, harassment, or worse. Knowledge, tact, and observation were essential survival tools. The stakes of misjudging authority were immense. Imperial China operated on a system of strict hierarchy and social expectation, and stepping outside prescribed roles could have severe consequences. A poor farmer could be accused of tax evasion, an artisan could fall out of favor with a local official, and a merchant could be punished for failing to adhere to trading regulations. These consequences extended beyond financial loss. They could mean imprisonment, forced labor, or even death. Everyday life was a constant negotiation with authority, where understanding the subtleties of social, political, and cultural norms was essential. The pervasive influence of politics extended into family life. Families often aligned themselves with powerful patrons or officials to ensure protection, opportunity, or social standing. These alliances could provide security, but they also created obligations and risk. A fall from favor could drag an entire family into danger. Children were expected to behave in ways that upheld family honor. Adults had to navigate loyalty to superiors while managing their household, and elders were responsible for maintaining connections and ensuring proper conduct. The family, while a source of support, was also a framework of expectations where failure or misjudgment could have severe consequences. Even ordinary social interactions were affected by politics and authority. Gossip, rumors, and perceived slights could escalate quickly. A comment misinterpreted by a neighbor, a dispute with a merchant, or a disagreement with a village elder could trigger legal or social repercussions. People had to constantly monitor their words, gestures, and actions, understanding that the consequences could extend far beyond the immediate situation. Relationships required careful cultivation, strategic alliances, and an awareness of the shifting dynamics of power. Survival demanded vigilance, intelligence, and diplomacy. The judicial system itself was deeply entwined with politics. Officials were both enforcers and participants in a network of influence. Decisions about punishment, taxation, and property disputes were influenced not only by law, but also by personal relationships, bribery, and political pressure. Justice was therefore both a mechanism of control and a reflection of social hierarchy. Those who could navigate this system successfully could achieve security or advancement, while those who failed risked severe punishment. Ordinary citizens learned to understand the subtleties of authority, anticipating how decisions might be influenced by hidden factors. Palace intrigue was not limited to the emperor and his ministers. Imperial succession, the favor of concubines, the ambitions of generals, and the competition between eunuchs created a constantly shifting political landscape. Edicts, policies, and local governance could change suddenly based on the outcome of intrigue. For citizens and officials alike, this meant that the rules could shift without warning, and survival depended on awareness, adaptability, and often sheer luck. Even minor misunderstandings could have cascading effects, reflecting the fragile balance of power in every aspect of life. The consequences of falling out of favor were severe. Officials could be dismissed, punished, or executed. Families could lose wealth, property, or standing. Citizens caught in the crossfire could be accused of supporting a disfavored faction, resulting in imprisonment, fines, or forced labor. Political turbulence created uncertainty and fear, making life in Imperial China as psychologically demanding as it was physically challenging. Every action, every decision, and every association could carry hidden risks. Corruption and bribery were pervasive, shaping daily life for both officials and citizens. Access to justice, protection from punishment, and opportunities for advancement often depended on gifts, favors, or strategic relationships. Wealthy individuals could influence outcomes, while the poor had little recourse if accused or mistreated. This created a dual system of survival. Obedience and diligence were necessary, but so was the ability to navigate human ambition, greed, and influence. Awareness, foresight, and subtlety were survival skills as vital as labor or education. Military power also influenced politics and daily life. Generals, soldiers, and local militias held authority in their regions. Their favor could ensure security, while their hostility could devastate communities. Conscription, forced labor, or arbitrary raids could impact daily life without warning. The presence of armed authority created a constant undercurrent of risk, emphasizing the precariousness of existence in a society where power was absolute and often unpredictable. Even education and civil service were politically influenced. The imperial examination system offered a path to advancement, but success required not only knowledge and skill, but also social connections and strategic patronage. Favorable recommendations, mentorship, and family status could determine opportunities. Conversely, failing to secure support or aligning with the wrong faction could prevent advancement and limit security. Politics shaped every avenue of personal development, intertwining ambition, loyalty, and survival. Local disputes reflected the broader dynamics of power. Land conflicts, market disagreements, and personal rivalries could escalate quickly if officials were involved. Decisions could favor the wealthy or influential, while the poor often bore the consequences. The ability to anticipate, negotiate, and align oneself with authority was essential. Even mundane interactions, like selling goods at a market or paying tribute to a landlord, were laden with potential risk. Ordinary life was a continuous exercise in judgment, diplomacy, and caution. Political intrigue also affected cultural and social life. Festivals, ceremonies, and rituals were opportunities to display loyalty, assert influence, or gain favor. Participation was not optional, and failure to adhere properly could result in social or political consequences. Understanding the proper way to behave, the significance of gestures, and the hierarchy of authority was crucial. Life was not just about labor or survival. It was about navigating a complex network of symbolic, social, and political expectations. The ever-present threat of purges and factional conflict created an atmosphere of tension. Officials who gained power could fall suddenly, dragging allies and family into danger. Ordinary citizens had to remain alert, careful in associations, and wary of involvement in disputes that could attract unwanted attention. Survival required both awareness of immediate circumstances and knowledge of broader political trends. Ignorance could be fatal, vigilance was essential, communication was carefully monitored. Letters, petitions, and even spoken words could carry risk if interpreted as disrespectful, seditious, or disloyal. People had to develop a keen sense of discretion, knowing when to speak, what to say, and how to convey messages without attracting danger. Even expressions of opinion, curiosity, or ambition could be dangerous if misperceived. The ability to navigate social and political currents was as vital as physical strength or labor skills. In essence, life in Imperial China required constant negotiation with power. Authority existed on multiple levels, from the emperor to local officials, from family elders to village leaders. Every interaction was potentially consequential. Every gesture, word, and decision could influence survival, social standing, and security. Power and politics were not abstract. They were deeply personal, affecting the daily lives of every individual. Surviving in this environment demanded intelligence, caution, adaptability, and sometimes cunning. Ordinary citizens had to learn to read people, anticipate shifts in power, and navigate complex hierarchies. Families taught children to respect authority, maintain discretion, and develop skills that would allow them to endure. Failure to navigate these dynamics could result in punishment, loss of status, or worse. Survival was as much about strategy and awareness as it was about labor or obedience. In conclusion, Imperial China was a land of breathtaking innovation, beauty, and culture, but it was also a world of danger, intrigue, and constant vigilance. Power was absolute, politics were deadly, and survival required skill, intelligence, and luck. The interplay of authority, corruption, and social expectation created a society in which ordinary people were constantly tested. Every interaction mattered, every decision carried weight, and every day was a careful negotiation with forces far larger than oneself. Understanding this system is essential to appreciating the challenges, risks, and complexities of life in Imperial China, a world where one wrong move could change the course of your entire life. Life in Imperial China was not defined solely by labor, law, or politics. It was equally defined by culture, tradition, and the invisible rules that governed behavior, morality, and social interaction. Customs and expectations embedded in society shaped every decision, every gesture, and every relationship, creating a world in which survival depended as much on understanding cultural norms as on avoiding famine, disease, or punishment. To navigate daily life successfully, one had to internalize these expectations from birth, recognizing that failure to do so could bring not just social shame, but tangible consequences. From the earliest moments of life, individuals were immersed in a cultural framework that emphasized hierarchy, duty, and moral conduct. The family was the primary institution through which these values were transmitted. Children were taught to honor their parents, respect elders, and maintain the family's reputation at all costs. Filial piety was not a suggestion, it was a guiding principle that influenced education, work, marriage, and social behavior. Obedience to one's parents and elders was considered essential, and deviation was met with punishment, shame, or disapproval. The family was the first training ground in a society where survival required not only physical skill, but also moral and social awareness. Education was intertwined with cultural expectation. Boys were often prepared for public life, learning not just literacy and arithmetic, but also the Confucian classics, history, and philosophy. These lessons were not abstract. They were guides to behavior, morality, and governance. Understanding hierarchy, duty, and virtue was as important as memorizing texts. Girls, meanwhile, were educated in moral conduct, household management, and social etiquette. Their lessons were practical, teaching skills that would allow them to maintain the household, raise children, and navigate the complex social web of marriages and family alliances. Education, in every form, was a preparation for survival, ensuring that individuals could operate successfully within the rigid cultural and social structures of the empire. Ritual and ceremony played a central role in daily life. Birth, coming of age, marriage, and death were all marked by carefully prescribed rituals designed to maintain harmony, honor ancestors, and reinforce social hierarchy. Participating correctly in these ceremonies was essential. Missteps, whether in dress, speech, or action, could result in social shame or strained relationships. Festivals and public celebrations provided both relief and reinforcement of social norms. Observing the proper conduct during these events was not optional. It was a demonstration of loyalty, respect, and understanding of cultural codes. Religion and spiritual belief were deeply intertwined with cultural expectations. Ancestor worship was central, requiring daily offerings, prayers, and the maintenance of ancestral altars. Failure to honor one's ancestors could bring misfortune, both socially and spiritually. Superstitions, rituals, and local deities influenced decisions in agriculture, commerce, health, and marriage. These practices were not merely symbolic. They were believed to have real-world consequences. Observing cultural and religious norms was thus a strategy for survival, ensuring protection, favor, and social acceptance. Social hierarchy dictated nearly every interaction. Respect for elders, deference to authority, and acknowledgement of status were expected in every context. A simple greeting had to reflect the relative rank of the parties involved. Public behavior was carefully scrutinized, and social missteps could